Chapter 23. Stone Hollow. The gates of Stone Hollow groaned under the weight of centuries-old stone, creaking with the strain of a world far older than the city itself. The familiar, earthy scent of the place tugged at Tyrion's heartstrings as he stepped through the massive gates. Stone Hollow had always been his home, the city carved into the heart of the mountain, the deep wells of stone that whispered of his ancestors. But now, as the circle entered its hallowed streets, the warmth of home seemed strangely distant, replaced by a heavy weight of unease. Aros, lying limp on the stretcher, was the focus of their concern. His body was pale, too pale. The boy who had once sparked the rebirth of mana across the world now seemed fragile, as if the very energy within him was tearing him apart. The mana that had once pulsed through him with life and promise was now a torrent too wild to control, flooding through his veins and threatening to destroy him from the inside. Tyrion glanced down at the boy, guilt rising in his chest. We did this to him, he thought, his jaw clenched. He didn't ask for this power, but now it's consuming him, and we can't even help him. He didn't notice that Kaelin had stopped beside him until she spoke, her voice calm but full of concern. His body is struggling to handle the mana. It's too much for him, she said, quietly, her voice carrying the weight of her knowledge. The threads that should be guiding the energy, they're unraveling. It's like his body is rejecting the very essence that's keeping him alive. Tyrion's stomach twisted with dread. How did it come to this, he wondered. Why couldn't we control it? They arrived at the healer's chambers deep within Stone Hollow, a place lined with rows of herbs, potions, and ancient texts. The dwarven healers, seasoned and steady in their work, moved quickly to assess Aros's condition. Brundar, the chief healer, his beard thick and long with years of experience, stood over the boy, his hands hovering, unsure how to proceed. He was a master at mending bones, tending wounds, but this was far beyond anything he had ever encountered. His pulse is faint, Brundar muttered, his hands pressing against Aros's chest. There's life in him, but it's slipping away. This magic, it's too much. The boy's veins can't handle it. His body's rejecting the power coursing through him. Kaelin's brow furrowed in frustration. His mana is fluctuating too wildly. The energy should be in balance, its flow steady and controlled, but it's like a raging storm inside him. No wonder his body can't handle it. Tyrion's heart sank as he stood silently by Aros's side. The weight of responsibility crushed him. This is my fault, he thought. I couldn't control it. I couldn't protect him. I should have known this would happen. Kaelin turned to Brundar. There's nothing we can do here, is there? Brundar shook his head slowly, his expression grim. We heal wounds, Kaelin. But this is beyond healing. We can't stop the flow of mana inside him. His body is trying to absorb too much, and the threads that should guide it are tangled. The only hope for him lies in a source of pure mana. Somewhere his body can recalibrate and restore balance. Where? Tyrion asked, his voice sharp with urgency. Legend speaks of the Valley of Light, Kaelin said quietly, her gaze drifting toward the ancient texts that filled the room. The monks there once safeguarded a well of pure mana. It was said to have the power to heal and restore. If it still exists, if it's still untouched by the taint of shadow, it might save him. Brundar's eyes narrowed, skeptical. The Valley of Light, he echoed. That's nothing but a myth. No one's seen that well in generations. It's sealed away. No one even knows if it still exists. It exists, Kaelin said with quiet certainty. It's our only hope. Tyrion didn't hesitate. Then we leave for the valley at dawn. Later that evening, the circle gathered in Stone Hollow's great dining hall. The room was alive with the bustling sounds of dwarves preparing a feast. Roasted meats, hearty bread, and rich stews filled the air with their tantalizing aromas. Yet, even the warm, inviting atmosphere of the dwarven banquet hall could not shake the anxiety hanging over their hearts. As they sat down to eat, each member of the circle was lost in their own thoughts. Aros's fate weighed heavily on their minds, and the road ahead was uncertain. But before they could settle into a quiet moment, a familiar voice cut through the tension, causing Tyrine's shoulders to tighten involuntarily. "Well, well," Soriana's voice rang out, rich with amusement. "Still brooding in the corner, cousin." Tyrine didn't need to turn around to know she had entered the hall. The very air around her seemed to shift with her energy, playful, teasing, and unrelenting. He felt his jaw tighten in reflex. Of course, he thought bitterly. Of course she's here. Soriana's eyes locked with his, and that infuriating grin of hers spread across her face. "You really do need to lighten up," she teased, sauntering over to the table where Pip and Fennex were already seated. Tyrine couldn't help the growl that escaped him. "I've never been able to escape her," he thought, running a hand through his hair in frustration. He glanced toward Kaelin for support, but she only gave him a knowing smile and shrugged as if to say, "You're on your own with this one." Soriana plopped down beside Pip, who had been happily sampling a loaf of freshly baked dwarven bread. "I've decided to join you all on your little adventure," Soriana declared with a gleam in her eye. "I'm going with you to the Valley of Light. After all, you'll need a healer and a warrior, and you just can't survive without me." Tyrine rolled his eyes, but before he could say anything, Pip perked up. "You're coming with us? Awesome. I thought you looked familiar. It's going to be fun with you around." Soriana laughed, and for a moment the tension in the room seemed to dissipate. "Of course it will be fun, Pip," Soriana said, leaning back in her chair. "I always bring the party with me." Tyrine sighed heavily, his frustration mounting. "Of course she's here," he thought again. "Of all the people to join us, it had to be her." Pip, not sensing Tyrine's discomfort, eagerly grabbed another loaf of the dense dwarven bread and started slathering it with apple butter and mountain goat cheese. This stuff is great," she said with her usual enthusiasm. "You've got to try it, Soriana. This dwarven bread is the best." Soriana took a piece of the bread, inspecting it with a raised eyebrow before breaking off a small chunk and giving it a tentative taste. Her expression shifted from curiosity to mild distaste. It's dense," she commented, her voice polite but clearly unimpressed. "It's like eating a rock." Fennex, who had been quietly observing the exchange, took a piece himself, giving it a careful bite before passing it back with a bemused look. "It's an acquired taste," he said dryly, not hiding his own reaction. Pip, on the other hand, was practically ecstatic, lathering the bread with even more apple butter and cheese. "You guys are crazy," she said with a laugh. "This is amazing. I don't know what you're all talking about, but I love it." Soriana chuckled at Pip's infectious energy. "I see you've got a taste for the simple things, huh?" she remarked, impressed by the girl's boundless enthusiasm. Tyrine watched the scene with an inward groan. Why does she have to make everything into a spectacle? But despite himself, a smile tugged at the corners of his lips. Even though he hated admitting it, Soriana's teasing, her lively energy, and even her ability to push his buttons in ways only she could, brought a strange sense of familiarity to the evening. Kaelin, always thoughtful, turned to Soriana. "So you've attuned to water mana, then? How did that happen?" Soriana's grin softened slightly as she leaned back in her chair, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "I've always had a connection to it. Water. It flows, it heals, and it adapts. It's subtle, but it can be powerful. You learn to listen to it, to feel its whispers, and it guides you in ways you can't predict. It's taught me how to heal and how to protect. It's a connection I've had since I was young. Kaelin nodded, impressed by Soriana's explanation. Water mana. It's not easy to attune to, but I suppose it's fitting. You've always been adaptable. Soriana shrugged. I don't know about that. I just listen to what it tells me. We all have our ways of connecting to mana, don't we? Tyrion, still trying to shake off his frustration, glanced at Kaelin. She always has a way of making everything sound so simple, he thought, but his gaze softened as he realized that this was the path they were all on. We are all learning to adapt, aren't we? Soriana turned to Tyrion with a raised eyebrow. And you, cousin, I hear you've adapted to mana too. What's that like? Didn't you always think it was just a myth? Tyrion shifted uncomfortably. He hadn't expected to be the subject of discussion so soon. I didn't ask for it, he muttered. It just happened. Soriana raised an eyebrow, clearly entertained by his discomfort. Oh, I'm sure, she teased, but I bet you're starting to enjoy it. You can't fight it forever, cousin. Mana has a way of getting under your skin. Kaelin's voice broke through the banter, turning the conversation back toward the matter at hand. Mana doesn't just impose itself on us, she said thoughtfully. It's not about fighting it. It's about learning to live with it, to channel it. Soriana chuckled softly, taking a sip of her drink. Well, I'll believe it when I see it, she said, looking directly at Tyrion. Can't wait to see how you handle it, cousin. Tyrion groaned inwardly. Not this again. But I suppose she's right. Mana's a part of me now, whether I like it or not. As the meal continued, the group exchanged stories, laughter, and quiet reflection. Despite the darkness that loomed ahead, there was a sense of camaraderie that filled the room. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of their journey, the road to the Valley of Light. It would be dangerous, it would be uncertain, but they would face it together. For tonight, they rested. Tomorrow would come soon enough.